This session, we're going to look at two key areas. The first one is looking at what is an effective response by defining it, and then we're going to get into how to structure one. So let's get into the first section, which is defining effective responses. Have you ever thought, what is it that makes an effective presentation or an effective response? A lot of people haven't, so that's what we're going to do now. And there are a couple of reasons why we're going to do that. Well, the first reason is that it gets you thinking about what an effective presentation or effective response is. The second reason is that it's going to introduce you to the key concepts we're going to be covering for the rest of the course. And the third one is we're going to be using it as reference, similar to Discovery. We're going to use a reference in the role plays we do. So it'll create a bit of a critique. So you're going to get a lot out of this. And the way we're going to do this is, first of all, I'm going to ask for your ideas and your thoughts. And then I'm going to introduce you to the workshop definition that's going to cover those key areas we're going to be covering. Okay, so let's kick off. Are you ready? Good. Think back to a time that you saw a really effective, persuasive presentation. Could be a response to a customer's needs, or it could just be a highly effective and persuasive presentation. In other words, one that makes something happen at the end of it, where there is some movement in the listener or the audience's mind, or they actually go and do something. So think back to something you thought was really great. Have you got one? Okay, I want you now to deconstruct it in your mind. What were the key elements that made it so effective? So think, what are the things they did or they said? What was it that made it so effective? And send me in the chat your ideas. So just pop in the chat your ideas. There's no right or wrong. There's the first example. That's another example. That's a great example. Oh, look, someone's put one of those in, and I would read these out. All right, so that's your ideas. Now we're going to look at our definition. Now, just like before, what I want you to do is be aware of, and you might want to take a photograph of this, because each line has a key point associated, which is what we are going to be covering later on in the session. So this is what we believe is an effective response, what it makes up an effective response. It's a structured interaction that uses words and actions to persuade individuals to take action. So I'm going to go through these section by section, line by line. And let's see what you think. So the first part of it is a structured interaction, a structured interaction. So what do we mean by a structured interaction? Well, thinking about all the presentations and the communications that we've seen and some of the key concepts that we've covered so far, that presentation or that response has a clear beginning, a middle, and end. So people know what's coming up, they're presenting the information, and it's got a super clear end to that, which includes things like next steps. And we're going to be covering that in more detail pretty much next. It's an interaction. Now, what do we mean by that? If you consider an interaction is something that is two-way. Okay, it's two-way interaction. So in chat, send me ideas of how someone can make something two-way. So rather than it being an information dump, just one way, and we've all been there, right? Someone's just giving us information, telling us stuff. How could we make it two-way and more engaging? All right, so questions, absolutely. Yeah. So we can ask questions. We can also simulate what people do in real life, which is look for feedback. So actually send off non-verbal as well as verbal signals. We want their feedback. So one of the key things we're looking for here is that you're still engaging people. And when it's virtual, you have to engage people even more. So two-way engagement is incredibly important and effective, especially virtual communication. It uses words and actions. What do I mean by that? Well, obviously, words are important, but how you communicate those words are even more important. According to a recent Harvard Business study, you can increase the effectiveness of your communication by just switching on the camera. Then you get not just what people are saying, but you get what they look like. You're getting all the emotion. You can actually see what's going on in their face. It is incredibly important because actions do, in many ways, speak louder than the words. So what's the big one here? We're going to look at how you can engage with people through your presence, through your body language. But one of the big things to take away from here is if you're not switching on your camera, you are losing a huge amount of impact to the people on the other side. Switch it on. It needs to persuade. So what is it that persuades us? What is it that people say that persuades us? Well, there are two key elements that persuade us that we'll be looking at. And persuasion's all around capturing people's hearts and minds. And the way you do that is through, number one, relevance. So relevance to what? To their needs. And the other one is evidence. And this is a big one, selling through evidence, not your opinion, but actually utilizing evidence to support your opinion or support your claims or support your recommendations. Now, it's all about persuading individuals. And one of the key things here is if we're talking about relevance, and we're talking about relevance being the number one persuader, it needs to be relevance to what the individual decision makers and key stakeholders want. So what are their needs? What are the outcomes they're looking for? How can you make it relevant to that? What are the challenges they're wanting to address? How can you make it relevant to that? We're going to look at persuasion in the next but one, no, the next module. And then finally, taking action. Wow. It's very interesting, isn't it? Have you ever been in a presentation where it's brilliant, it's really good, you're totally convinced, you think this is, I'm 100% convinced here, and then there's no call to action? They don't suggest what the next thing should be or what you can do, or whether you go to a website or whether you agree to move forward with some small step, or whether you do for agree to a POC, whatever it is. There's no call to action. It's just left there. I was quite into that. I kind of agreed to it. Yeah. No? Well, I'll just leave it then. Absolutely imperative is it has a clear call to action. Everything drives towards that call to action. So what we're going to be looking at is how we structure a communication with clear beginning, middle, and end, how we can create it in such a way and communicate such a way that's two-way, that we can bring in our body language and presence, and we can persuade others through a language of relevance and evidence so that they agree to our requests or take action.